Hey guys, today's story is about a guy named Joseph. When talking about problem players, it's important to distinguish that a crappy player can be a good friend, and a good player can be a crappy friend. However, with Joseph, it was clear that he was both a bad player and a bad friend. I met Joseph on a Discord server running a homebrew setting with D&D 5e. Most activities and games were small sessions connected by the same setting and characters with different DMs. I had formed a small group of friends, and we often hung around. One player in our group, Taylor, had joined at the same time as Joseph, and as such, formed a sort of bond together. When Joseph's character died, it created a shift in Taylor's character, and caused the start of a still ongoing character arc for Taylor, which is going on over 2 years now. Joseph began to slowly hang around our group more often, something that we didn't mind at first. They talked about the game and showed interest in the same things. But soon enough, Joseph would start to show his first red flags. Though, in the moment, we would take this as minor inconveniences. Or, oh, that's just Joseph. He rarely played with us as a character after his first character's death, mostly sticking to being a DM on our server. Joseph dominated VCs with talks about his other hobbies, his life, his thoughts on the game, and his thoughts on the setting, and really just generally anything. If he thought it, he said it, and he would let us know. We could get him to stop talking over others after a gentle reminder, yet this behavior was something that he continued, up until the last time that I talked with him. If he wasn't talking over someone else, he would frequently complain about the system that we used. He was a die-hard 3.5 fan, and would constantly rules lawyer or argue the flaws of 5th edition. Now, I agree that the system has its flaws, but none of us seemed to care or agree with him, which made it all the more aggravating when we wanted to talk about something else. Yet he just kept trying to talk about 3.5. There was also another player, Raven, who both Joseph and I had a crush on. It led to an awkward out-of-character situation, with Joseph feeding me information that eventually led to the relationship between Raven and I dissolving. The messy drama eventually resolved into all of us deciding to remain mutual friends, though. Thankfully. Yet, Joseph still exhibited simp-like behavior, and, for a while, the debacle was a sore spot for me. Raven seemed to take things in stride, and tried to not make things awkward for us. There's a lot more I can say about Joseph. At times, he was a close friend and confidant, and the next, he was running over to your crush to tell them that, "I'm so glad that you two are in a relationship." Some notable moments include, he openly had NPCs flirt with player characters, despite the player's wishes or comfort. His games would have bizarre rulings that he would list in a Google Doc that he would edit mid-session, to cement his authority as a DM and keep track of his rulings. He would also come into calls drunk, or high, or both, just to tell us how much we meant to him, which is something that felt very contradictory considering what he did when he was sober. He also created a foil to my character by taking everything that made her a character and trying to invert it, and only ended up being extremely inflammatory and offensive. He also constantly explained out-of-character concepts to us, bringing the in-character action and intrigue to a grinding halt. And yet, the situation I regale today is perhaps the last straw many people in our friend group had with him. We were playing in a session set on a small island cursed by foreign magic that made our magic items stop working. It was a fun plot for intrigue, exploration, and roleplay. We had a few players who had originally come from this island and wanted to learn more about this land to break its curse and tame its wild, wacky magic. Raven was one of those players, and she was very into the story that was presented as well as her character. But none of us ever got to resolve the plot after the stunt that Joseph pulled. Raven coordinated with the DM to run a session with the express purpose of exploring the history of this magical island. As Raven's character and ours were friendly, we lent our aid and we followed her on this expedition to discover more about her land's history. Her character was one of the few from this island. When Joseph heard that Raven was leading an expedition in character, Joseph made a character quickly before the session so that he could tag along with us, and, more importantly, Raven. If we had any complaints with them joining, they didn't matter. Joseph's character was a fighter, or wizard, or something. I honestly can't remember, it's been a year and a half. And it was designed to be the Mandalorian. So yeah, in this roleplay and exploration heavy session, he wanted to play a bounty hunter that was ripped off from the TV show. The session went bad. Joseph constantly tried to wrestle control of the group from Raven, which led to her becoming noticeably stressed and irritated with him, which made him moan and pout, since he had hurt her feelings. Raven would have been more open to his suggestions for leading the party if he had understood why we were undertaking this adventure, and why we were following Raven's lead. In combat, he was very headstrong and pedantic on his turn. He tried to help us on our turns, and frequently tried to correct the DM on obscure rules regarding his homebrew monsters. During out-of-character planning and discussion, he constantly brought up Star Wars and his new character, which interrupted us and the DM. The final straw came with the temple. It was a small pyramid-like structure that we solved a small puzzle to get into. Inside of it was a square room with the walls covered in engraved gold. The gold was engraved with the history and lore of the island, a solid clue, and our first big lead on the history of the island. As we were exploring the room, and a few smaller side rooms, Joseph was quiet. And then, after a while of us roleplaying and collecting artifacts for study, Joseph spoke up.
So these walls are made out of gold, right?
Yes, finely engraved golds with depictions of...
Well, I did the math. Based on the perimeter of this room, this gold should be more than enough for my character to retire. I want to start peeling the gold off the wall.
We sat quiet for a moment as that sunk in. Joseph laughed at his declared action. Not malicious or creepy, but a laugh that implied he thought that this situation was humorous to him, as though he had just beaten the DM at his own game. Raven was the first to object, trying to explain how that absolutely defeated the point of the session, and the point of the expedition. The other players also tried to talk him down, stating that we wouldn't just take kindly to such an action against our in-character friend when it just came from a stranger who we met a few moments ago. And when all was said and done, the DM confirmed with Joseph that he still wanted to do this, which, of course he did. So the DM tried his best, asking Joseph to roll a stealth or sleight of hand check to start chipping off the gold. By the time one of us in character noticed this, he had already taken about a foot of the wall off. Our characters rightfully told him to stop and to get lost, that he was defacing an ancient site, and he responded out of character by saying that this was the fastest way for his character to retire, and
it's what my character would do.
He then acted surprised when we turned hostile, since we apparently didn't warn him that we were against this sabotaging action. We ended the session shortly after, and we left the VC with Joseph. It was wrong, looking back, to leave them alone and give him the cold shoulder. Yet, at that moment, we all didn't want to deal with his behavior. We never really figured out what exactly the monument was for, or what the history of the island was. Enthusiasm for the plot died almost overnight. We kept some of the characters around and had a good time without Joseph's characters, and we still play together till this day. I apologize that this was really long, but the more I began to write, the more I began to remember little things that made Joseph so toxic. And thank you for listening. Well guys, the fact that Joseph was still involved with this group past the whole drama instigating part is kind of confusing. If you got someone who's kind of being that type of person, you really probably should get rid of them. Leastwise in D&D if they are going to be having the main character syndrome constantly. The DM here could have also just said, no, you're not going to loot the gold off the wall. Or could have just summed it up as, oh hey, it's gold leaf. It looks like a lot, but it's actually not. Or it's not even gold, it's brass or some other yellowish material. Or it's cursed, and him trying to loot it immediately strikes him dead. Or some such. Anyway, that's it for this one, so, as always, have a good one.